everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Gab with your GAD with Eric Myers. We're glad you're here. As always, Eric's got some great content, and the coolest thing about these is that they are accessible after the fact. So you can always go back and see what you may have missed or share with others. I want to do a quick promotion of our new Agent Academy, which starts next week. And please share with others in your office or your brokerage. It's a great chance for those new to the industry or those that have maybe taken a break and are back in the industry to set them up for success in ways that can enhance their business. So please consider that. That does start next week, and it's for 6 weeks. Also want to let you know David's got a webinar on Thursday, and then next month we'll be transitioning to a monthly webinar. So keep your eye out for that. And I will go ahead and turn it over to Eric. Let me just remind you that you'll be muted, but we'd love for you to shout out any questions for Eric. So use the chat box, and I'll be monitoring it and passing those questions along. So thanks again for being here, everybody.
So Eric Myers, Gab with your GAD. This is the final one, and we want to thank everyone for tuning in to this point. We're probably not going to get rid of the Gab with your GAD moniker, but you might see this work product turned into something a little bit more digestible, a little smaller, some bite-sized bits, maybe some videos in the weekly e-news and stuff like that. This has kind of run its course, and it's just, we did do a survey and we took some member feedback. But, we're kind of to the end of, weekly pandemic updates and kind of to the end of some of the other updates. And there's a good feeling from us and from what we received from the surveys that there's been some fair amount of learning that goes on with these as well. So I kind of go through where to get all this information, and then you guys at some point actually know where to get the firsthand information. We do believe it's been very successful, and we are going to turn it into some other work products. I want to thank Bell Bank and Mortgage, North Star MLS, Royal Credit Union, and Supra. So, and with that, we'll just get started. We may go a little quick today. There's not a lot of people on the call, so I will stop and ask if you have questions, and certainly let's take them as you have them. Like I said, there's not too many people, so it shouldn't slow us down too much. My name is Eric Myers, Government Affairs Director, active lobbying in Minnesota for 20 years. And my approach and my role has changed during the pandemic, and I've kind of dedicated myself to a more holistic government affairs offering so that we can make sure that you are fully up to date on what's happening with presidential orders, U.S. House, Senate, executive orders at the state level with the governor, but then also stuff at the federal level from the agencies, HUD, IRS, and Treasury. And you see some of those updates with the SBA programs, PPP, coming out and following all that. So, and then the monitoring of protest violence, curfews, and other government response to those programs. And we'll talk a little bit about those today too. A lot of great resources. This slideshow is full of links, so if you want to, and it is being recorded and you can access it after the fact. So these links are live and you can click through to any of them at any time. Stay-at-home orders, realtors have been essential. There's a lot of consternation and talk about the foreclosure and eviction moratorium, and we'll talk some about that. Stay home, stay safe. There is still testing, and if you have COVID-19 symptoms, you should get a test. Stay at home, but don't stay in a domestic violence situation. There are resources for you or your clients who might be experiencing that. Unemployment support. Most of it goes through deed. Remember, the 13-week extension that was added in the CARES Act expires by mid-month. So 26 weeks of unemployment in Minnesota becomes 39 weeks under the CARES Act federal authorization extension, but that expires. And the $600 per week boost also expires by mid-month. So just be aware of that. Childcare, housing, emergency food support. MAR's going to be potentially working on some food support as an organization in July, so I can't tell you more than that because I don't want to steal the association's thunder when we do put that effort underway. Some updates from the governor this week. There was some offering free COVID testing in Austin over the weekend, and Governor Walz is announced through deed. They were accepting applications for $62.5 million in small business grant relief grants, and people could have gotten signed up for that. And then there was random draws to be eligible for that funding. And then Governor Walz and Flanagan are working with the legislature on police reform. And on Thursday of last week, they distributed about $850 million in relief to communities across the state impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. So those dollars went out for local government support. There are limits to what those dollars can be used for. And so they can't just fill their budget holes with them. They have to use them for very specific tasks. But nice that those dollars are going out across the state. And then on Friday, the Minnesota Health Department had identified 4 bars from across the state and emphasized and that were a source of a large number of COVID-19 infections. And you can actually click on this link and it'll take you to the 4 bars that were kind of called out. And they're surprising too, because they're not all in the metro. There were some in greater Minnesota as well. So some interesting things as people are starting to go back and feel more comfortable. You're also seeing an uptick in some cases, and there were a couple hot spots that the health department was aware of even by Friday of last week. So here's 3 different sites you can go to. These mostly come from the deed website. So if you're a business and you're considering how to have your workers return, there's some information and guidance for you here. If you're a worker and you're considering how to return and how to maintain and safeguard your own health, there's some information for you here, and just kind of generally some safe work guidelines as well. So a lot of nice iconography, some great links. The peacetime emergency is extended through July 13th. This means you cannot evict someone or begin the writ of recovery like a foreclosure proceeding during this time. So you can't be kicking anyone out, even if they haven't paid rent, and you can't start eviction proceedings or foreclosure proceedings through this date. And we're widely expected to believe that the governor will call the next special session on July 12th so that he can try to extend this emergency peacetime again. There may be increased efforts to also resist that move next time as well, and some votes that might try to do that. But the Minnesota Realtors put out some guidance about Executive Order 2074, and by today, every business in critical sector workers are required to adopt a preparedness plan and have that plan on file at the office. There are links in this document, in this guidance, and there is a template, and you can download that template, fill it out, and have it on hand. So I absolutely would make sure you have all this information covered and placed securely in a secure file that should it be requested of you, you can produce it. Again, with this executive order, there's nothing you need to turn in. So Minnesota cases dashboard. If you want to know the updated daily numbers, you can end up at the daily dashboard. Another thing I wanted to tell people about, I hadn't mentioned previously, is that if you have the weather.com app on your smartphone, there's actually a COVID-19 section of the weather.com app, and it'll tell you how many COVID cases in your county, in your city, in your kind of, maybe that whole your neck of the woods kind of thing. So I've been kind of following that throughout as well. I might just in the middle of the day, the thought might come to me, let's see how many are in Andover, let's see how many in Maple Grove and Plymouth and elsewhere, and you can pull it up that way as well. A lot of the cases obviously have been in congregate living. Let me pull up my pointer options. A lot of it's been in congregate living, and a lot of it's been in healthcare. When you add these two together, they become the second biggest total here. And then there's been community transmission where they've known the source, but there's been some fair amount of community transmission where they don't have the source as well. Everybody knows that it impacts the elderly the most severely, and that's where more of the deaths come and up in the older age brackets, but more of the cases actually come in the younger person bracket. So that's interesting to remember there. And then there's some information about cases by race. And then, of course, the guidance to stay, wash your hands, get tested, stay away 6 feet from each other, stay home, wear a mask, on and on. George Floyd situation, and we'll talk about more on police reform towards the end of this. Obviously, a devastating incident for our communities. There's not much more to say on this at this point, but we're going to talk about police reforms towards the bottom of this presentation. Unemployment, and you can see how Minnesota's been faring compared to our five, compared to the U.S. and 3 other states near us. So we're doing well. We're sub 10. Others are between 10 and even up to 20, 22 and a half there in Michigan, impacted heavily. Definitely what I would say on this one is it's the sector diversity that Minnesota has, business sector diversity. You can follow some of the continuing claims on unemployment. And so these are continuing claims and these are the initial claims. And then, sector by sector, but, it's nice that Minnesota does have such a rich diversity of sectors in Minnesota. While some have been, food and entertainment, and retail have been hit hardest. There are some states that just don't have this many sectors to begin with. So then when they do have losses in their major sectors, it impacts the overall numbers a little more harsher. NAR developed a guide, a brochure that you can use with homeowners to talk about forbearance and forbearance options so that you can begin the conversation. This is a template, download it here and put your own information in it, contact information, and send it out to your consumers or use it to talk with your consumers, and it should give you a nice place to start. FHA announced that after the successful completion of a forbearance, after 3 consecutive payments, once you've restarted, that FHA will treat it for the purposes of refinance or a new home purchase as if it never occurred. So that's what this guidance says. Unemployment status, the fixed $600 federal boost is set to expire in late July. So if you're currently on unemployment and you get to the last week in July and you get a certain dollar amount right now, you could subtract, without federal action, you could subtract $600, and that's what you may expect in that last week of July or first week in August when you get paid at that point. The U.S. House has extended. They passed a bill that would extend this expiration through January of 2021, but the Senate has not acted yet. There is concern that people are making too much money on unemployment, more than they could even if they were working. And so honestly, to tell you at this point, if the Senate does not act, it will be for that number one reason. That will likely be the framing, that will likely be what the Senate leaders turn back to the people of this country and say. So we don't have any further word that they're going to take up that bill before now, between now and then. They may not. Of course, unemployment has applied to 1099 workers, including realtors. Let's skip through here. There have been some, Minneapolis is not doing as bad as some parts of the country. It's doing kind of middle of the road in terms of 2.17% of people late on mortgage payments. So you see some locations across the country that are doing worse and some locations across the country that are doing better. Seasonal unemployment, so the unemployment through May 2020 is 9.9%, so just under 10, and you have the whole U.S. economy performing at a 13.3. So Minnesota being under that, and that's good news for us. Sector by sector, you can check the over the year growth. So this would be through this time last year, and you can check it by sector, and you can see which ones have been the most impacted. Hold on, I'm gonna hold on one sec. Sorry about that. I'll be right back here. So, pandemic unemployment, realtors were eligible. There's some information from earlier slides. Go through some of this. The Small Business Administration has updated the PPP loan guidance program. They put a new update out on June 17th. You can click through here to the NAR guide on that loan guidance program. It's a 12-page guidance, and everything about the program, including the program summary, program details, and information on how to apply for your forgiveness portion of that loan is all here in this update. Click through this update, and then when you're in this update, there are links directly to the forgiveness forms and how to go about that. Let's get the CARES. Minnesota Legislature left a number of things undone. They did not do a bonding bill. They did not pass legislation regarding the oversight of federal CARES Act funding. They haven't done anything substantial on police reform. The House put a bunch of bills forward, and then I believe they were starting to put them together in one package, and the Senate did not take those up before they decided to adjourn themselves. This one shouldn't be here still. I'll just strike that. That actually did happen. And then tax bill too. There was no tax bill. Emergency powers were extended by the governor through July 13th. Representative Hassan, a Democrat, a DFL member of the Minnesota House, 62A, this is a Minneapolis district. She did put out House File 83, and it would, for some types of properties, commercial and residential, that are subject to subsidy or government help, it would essentially have capped rent increases for commercial and residential properties. So this bill was opposed by the Minnesota Realtors, and then was also opposed by Minnesota Multi-Housing. That bill did pass House Judiciary and Civil Law Committee, and is actually being referred to the Minnesota House Ways and Means Committee, which is generally a clearinghouse committee for that institution, and could mean that it's ready for floor action should it move out of there. The Minnesota Legislature isn't in session at the moment, but that bill remains active. So the Minnesota Realtors testified against it. Your Vice President for Government Affairs for the Minnesota Realtors, your Government Affairs Director for the State Association testified against it, and so did Multi-Housing. And you can look at that information there. Minneapolis Mayor has an emergency order that requires any person 2 years old or older and who's medically able to tolerate a mask wear one in public, in places of a public accommodation. What those definitions are, what those places are, where you must do them is all in this order, but it is a law, and you can be fined for not wearing a mask in these places. City of Minneapolis has had the Minnesota Human Rights Act lawsuit filed against it. It's been, the lawsuit scrutiny is supported by the Minneapolis Council, and there were a number of reforms in the immediate order of the lawsuit that the City Council and Minneapolis Police have had to adopt already. And those would be a ban on chokeholds and a duty to report anyone that's using one, no matter their rank or seniority, and a duty to attempt to verbally intervene, and a duty to actually attempt to physically intervene to get their colleague from stop using those illegal holds. Those things have already been implemented and accepted by the Minneapolis Police Department and are part of department policy today. Additionally, only the police chief or his or her immediate designee may authorize the use of force against a demonstration or protest group of individuals. So no use of force can be authorized by anyone short of the chief or their first immediate designee. So those changes have come as a direct result of the lawsuit. This lawsuit will continue on and will assess whether disparities exist from a protected class standpoint within the structures of the Minneapolis Police Department. Non-policing related, there is a new renters protection ordinance that started June 1st. If you are a landlord and you have more than 15 units, in Minneapolis, you are subject to the renter protection ordinance that started on June 1st. You can click here and learn more about it. If you have less than 15 units in Minneapolis, you are not yet subject to the Minneapolis Renters Protection Ordinance, but you should start working yourselves to being compliant with the ordinance, because by December 1st of this year, you'll have to be compliant. On a separate issue, Minneapolis did vote to study the issue of TOPA, Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act. It's a Washington, D.C. based model where if you own a building, before you can sell it to a third party, you have to actually approach the tenant and say, are you willing, do you want to buy this? And then the clock starts, and there are multiple time frames that you need to meet within that. We put together a focus group of 5 realtor individuals that were involved with giving input back to the vendor. The vendor is completing their final report to the city by mid-July. Our 5 group of realtors that were involved co-signed a letter that will be included in the final report to the city about the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act and some of the concerns we have. Updates, primers, and talking points on TOPA, Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act, are all on the Minneapolis MAR website. So Lawrence Yoon had some ideas for increasing Black homeownership, and this actually comes from survey data that his economics department does at NAR. And so this isn't just, hey, these are some ideas that might work. These are from after talking to consumers and potential home buyers every year. This is the information they've come up with in terms of what would be beneficial for them. So across the country, we have a lot of areas where we have a real lack of housing supply. So increasing the housing supply is one of the ideas. Focusing on opportunity zones, the legislation that was in the 2017 Tax Cut and Jobs Act allows for tax opportunity zones to be utilized in disadvantaged census tracts throughout the U.S. and those that already previously been identified. So if housing and commercial housing, so multi-family housing can be built in those zones, that could potentially bring more units to bear. So he's saying that that's a possibility. Adapt the credit scoring models. People that pay rent and make utility payments right now don't often receive credit for making those monthly payments on time. You could rent for 10 years, make every rental payment on time for 10 years, but the credit scoring model doesn't credit you the same as if you made 5 straight years of a car payment or 6 straight years of a car payment. The same thing for utility payments. You could pay your cell phone bill, your electric bill, your gas bill for 10 years straight every month on time, but you're not getting any positive credit from having made those payments on time like you would with other payments. So one of the ideas would be to adapt the credit scoring model and add these additional payment options that could be considered for yet as proof that you do make payments on time. So credit worthiness and credit reliability, basically. And then offer greater down payment assistance. There's a lot of government greater down payment assistance programs out there. We really do encourage realtors to be familiar with every down payment assistance program in the Twin Cities. If you're on the MLS and you have a buyer that's looking for down payment assistance, of course we have DPR, down payment assistance resource, which is available on MLS. So you can find a listing that has down payment assistance attached to it, or potentially attached to it based on availability in area. So if you get a consumer that says to you, man, I would like to live in Brooklyn Park, but I do need down payment assistance. Is there any, I was looking at this house, can you show me this house on Saturday? Does this house qualify for down payment assistance? You can find out on a property level whether there's some down payment assistance available potentially with that connected address. So realtors should be doing that, not skipping those steps, especially when they know their consumer is particularly interested in down payment assistance. If you interact with a a consumer in the marketplace that needs down payment assistance, please help them, connect them with the programs. And here's the other thing is, if you become the expert on down payment assistance program, and then you make that sale and you get that person in home ownership, guaranteed, almost 9 times out of 10, that's going to be a customer for life. So their next move up, as they move on and they do well in housing, they're going to keep coming back to you as their agent, their superstar, the person that got them into housing. And then Lawrence Yun talks about strengthening FHA. FHA was in receivership for many, many years. And so there are some federal reforms that NAR has offered in the past on how to shore up FHA. But lowering the mortgage insurance premiums, those MIPs have now been rolled into the loan, and there's no way to avoid paying them. And they're now for the life of the loan after a certain date and time from previous. So, but that doesn't have to be the final end all be all. A new policy could be in place, and MIP premiums could go down, and they can do so by policy. So I wanted to add some, I'll take some questions here in a minute if there are any, but I wanted to tell you that we are getting an emerging picture on what elections might be like. If you need to request an absentee ballot, because anyone can, and you no longer need to have an excuse to not vote in public because of COVID-19. If you want to request an absentee ballot, you can click right on this link. It will require your driver's license and the last 4 of your social, but you can request a ballot for the primary and for the general. And I went ahead and did this today, and it's on its way from the county. And you go in, you pull your county down, you put your address in, you put your driver's license in, you put your social in, and you click something at the bottom saying, your electronic signature, and they send it off. If you need to check to see whether you are registered to vote, you can click this registration link. Or if you need to update your registration like you've moved in the last few months, you can click that link as well, and there's some online self-service. If you want to just check, boy, I can't remember the last time I voted, or it's been a while, am I registered to vote? You can click on this link, fill out a couple quick questions about who you are, and then it'll tell you, yes, Eric Myers in Andover, Minnesota, you are registered to vote, and you can go to this school and vote on election day. Now, I've requested the absentee ballot, so I won't be able to vote on election day in person. So, are there any questions, Amy? I know we don't have a lot of people.
We don't have any questions, but I've got 2 comments that just with thanks that you're providing some great information, and that these have been very comprehensive. So you're covering a lot of good content. Well done.
Thank you. Well, so there was a MinPost story, and there were some pictures. I totally took these from the MinPost stories, but this is what you might physically encounter if you do show up to vote in person. Of course, all of us are getting familiar with these plastic barriers between you and whoever you're receiving a service from. So here's a picture of one of the polling places that they've set up, and you see the plexi there, and there's an opportunity to have things slip, pieces of paper and slip back and forth, but basically a large sneeze guard being erected and hopefully keeping people safe. And you see hand sanitizer in the back. You see this poll worker wearing a mask. So this is kind of what it may look like. They do plan to clean and sanitize the pens in between. So these are clean. They're showing you, bins of clean pens. Take one, take your ballot, and go fill it out. And then they plan to utilize signs. Yes, this has been cleaned. No, this hasn't been cleaned. So you're clear to go. And then, there was one too. Oh, I didn't have that picture in here yet, but there was a picture of the bin where they collect dirt and pens that are presumably uncleaned and need to be re-sanitized before they can be put in the sanitized bin.
What are your thoughts, Eric? Do you think the ID is ever going to be required?
That's been a subject
for years, I know.
Debate for years, and you've got a split legislature, and it is a very partisan issue. I don't see that passing this, before this election cycle. At the earliest, it would be the next cycle.
I was just curious your thoughts. Okay, yeah. Thanks.
Now other states do have rules and do have some of those rules in place. So that's just Minnesota. So just some of the evolving issues we're looking at, the need for systemic change in terms of policing in Minneapolis. There's a lot of discussion going on there. Closing the housing gaps in Minnesota. So non-white populations in Minnesota have some of the worst homeownership rates in the country, the largest gaps between whites and minority groups in the country. And there's been discussions in Congress about a second round of stimulus. I wouldn't bet the ranch on that either. I'm starting to feel like with the second round of stimulus or the extension, I just don't have a lot of faith that the Senate Republicans are actually going to come through on those. They could, and I could be wrong, and I could be pleasantly surprised. But I'd rather set myself up for disappointment on the other end of the spectrum. We're looking for more federal guidance on foreclosures and evictions, more state guidance on foreclosures and evictions. You know, the current moratoriums on foreclosures and evictions are great while they last, but the question is what happens as soon as they can't last forever, and there's no real good way to slowly unwind an eviction moratorium or slowly unwind a foreclosure moratorium, and at least not a policy that I've seen put forward yet. So there's a lot of concern. There were stories, it'll be in Trade this week, and there was a story in the Star Tribune that the state actions on evictions are kind of just building this backlog or wave of people that haven't paid in the last 2 months or 3 months, and as soon as you can file those eviction actions, then landlords will. I think that's probably true for some situations, and we don't have really good data on how many people that does include. We have some nationwide data, and we know that as of June 1st, 97% of people had made their June rent payment across the country. And but some of these programs, some of these policies have a delayed impact. So, okay, that was the case for June 1. What's the case for July 1, which is just around the corner here next week, or this week here? So what does the data look like after being able to look at that for 2-3 days? So just a lot of concerns on that, and not a real good way to kind of fix it. And that's it. And we're gonna end it here, get you off early and on with your day. And hopefully you've learned from these sessions. Hopefully you've found where you can get more resources, and you've also come to understand that the association is here for you. These things are being monitored for you. We put these updates in the newsletter to keep you updated in a timely way every single week. And if you ever have any questions that I can help you with local policy, or hey, I heard this happened at the state capitol, or what about the state capitol art? Are they putting Columbus back? There's a lot of information out there. If you have questions, reach out, and I can help be the conduit for you. If I don't have the answer, I'll point you in the direction where you can find the answer. The same thing with federal policies from NAR. If there's new guidance, new programs, we're here for you, and we'll make sure that you're updated. The goal is to have you be out there interacting with the consumer public and have you at your best, to have you at your most educated, and so that a consumer doesn't potentially know more than you in the marketplace when it comes to these items. So reach out. Here's my email address, phone number, available anytime. And thank you so much for joining these sessions and programs over the last few weeks. Any questions, Amy?
I don't see any questions, but I just wanted to say excellent, and thank you for your time and energy putting these together. I think they've been well received and really enhancing, really a great addition to your toolkit, so to speak, as a realtor. So well,
thank you for coordinating them. And I know David's going to move to a monthly format on his data release, so make sure you catch that. And look for video updates from us and our department. Sometimes they might feature me, sometimes they might feature a government affairs member, or the chair or the vice chair, or it might be Telly interviewing one of them, or something like that. So look for further offerings from us, and if you see government in the newsletter, make sure you still read that update. Thank you all. I really appreciate it.
Have a great day, everyone. Thanks for joining us.